And with the white pieces, the current world champion, Gukesh against Magnus Carlsen, and Gukesh has started, eliminates Equatrino. Boita's favorite is there. A Berlin defense. That's what Magnus is going to play, Raphael. That's a terrible defense, man. How are you going to have playability? Keep an eye on the show that's going to happen here. Why? The opening moves are normal. D3, B5, C3, forming the classic Lopez Berlin structure. Natural castling follows. Magnus played D6 to open the C8 bishop. Gukesh controlled G4. Magnus touches the bishop, also natural. Bishop A4 and Magnus holds. Bishop G5 is a normal idea because it eliminates the bishop on E7. With D6 already played, Neruga wants to avoid this position. Gukesh played Rook E1, planning to move the knight to F1 and Bishop B3 in the Lopez and Berlin. Magnus plays Bishop E5, the bishop goes to C2, and now Bishop to B6. Magnus can prepare a queenside advance at the right moment. Gukesh played Knight D2, and now Magnus goes for his classic Lopez plan, seen in the World Championship against Nepo. Move the knight from E7 to G6, controlling the F4 square. At this moment, Gukesh plays a move that is normal in the Lopez, but it has never been played before. In this position, A4 in this order has never been played. But even though it's not a move that scares us, it seems like a very famous idea, which is to capture here and play against the loose rook. On the A8 square, Magnus defended. RB8 was played, removing the rook from this theme. Guk played D4, breaking through the center, and the position will intensify from here. Magnus follows his plan, keeping an eye on Facundo's square, aiming to enter on F4, knight to F1, preparing Bishop E3 as well. Normal and E5, which you see day and night in the Lopez. Knight G3 is played by the world champion, eyeing F5, holding the center too. Now comes this exchange, another recapture, and now Bishop B7. A balanced position. Nothing special here. Nobody has any problems. Everything is fine. Even if Gukesh trades here, trades queens, this position already smells like a draw. Over there, Guiri already walks by with his arms up, and now, at this moment, Guk plays D5. This move brings a strategic idea against what Magnus was doing. So here it's a strategic war cry against Neruga, saying your bishop shouldn't be on Bishop B7. Why, Raphael? Because Gukesh took away all the bishop's squares, and at that moment, of course, Magnus responded. At the time, the world was wondering what the answer would be. And Magno plays the engine move, which is the move that opens up, look there, a new diagonal. Because no one was seeing that it was the engine's idea. But the surprise doesn't start or end here. Look at what's going to happen now. Because Gukesh played Bishop to E3, it was the plan he had already been preparing. The rook is here for that. And at this moment, Magno plays the engine's move. He solves the bishop. Raphael, Bishop 6. Everyone imagined that, but that's not the engine's move. Bishop C8 is a very difficult move to understand, but Magnus is in control after playing it. At first, it looks like he wants to control the F5 square, but no. In this position, after the bishops are exchanged, which will happen soon, Magnus will enter the F4 square, and incredibly, some bishop sacrifices on H3 start to appear. Look at what is going to happen from now on. Why? Here, the tension keeps rising. Guk is seeing that there's a threat, which is to take here and then capture on B2 that's also between the lines, and the world champion defended. The pawn on B2 with B3 Magnus exchanged. Now the rook reinforces the defense of the pawn, but opens up the F4 square. Magnus brought the knight right here, and at this moment, Gukesh played bishop to C6, saying, hold on, my bishop is very well placed. In this position, of course, a lot of time was spent in this game. An extremely complex and deep game, as you will see. Here, the engine starts suggesting bishop takes H3 as the second or third move. We'll get into that, and we'll understand that Magnus and Gukesh were seeing this theme. Magnus played rook to 4, Raphael. Why didn't he play this line that we still don't understand? Bishop takes H3. Now you'll understand. There really was this possibility. The question is whether rook B4 is better than bishop H3 or not, because the idea is that when you take... It seems like a kind of strange sacrifice, because, of course, the knight is well placed on F4. I play king to G1, and what compensation do black have? Now comes knight to 4, putting pressure on the rook or on the engine. It's rook to C3 defending, and now you play knight to H3, and you start to see the themes really appearing here on F2, so you have to be very careful. In this position, playing king to G2 is necessary to get out of check. Now you play rook to b4 from Magnus. Look, he plays this rook to b4. That's what Magnus is anticipating instead of sacrificing and playing rook to b4. He plays rook to b4 first, which the engine agrees with, Raphael, but wait, there's a hanging knight. Well, f2 is also hanging. First, if you take the knight, you get forked. And here you lose the queen. Black is completely winning, just so we understand a bit of what's going on in this position. And of course, we'll understand the moves by Magnus and Gukesh from here. Looking at this line we just saw, because Magnus advanced the rook to 4. Of course, this move, he's keeping an eye on the e4 pawn. He's waiting to see where Gukesh will go. Gukesh was considering the bishop sacrifice on h3. That's why he played queen c2. See there, it makes sense. He defends the strong pawn on e4 and moves the queen away from that fork we just saw where the king would go to h3 and f2 would fall with a fork. So the queen is better on c2. The game is really confusing as it changed from the first day. At this moment, Magnus makes his move, g6. And here, he brings the idea of advancing the pawns against the knights that are protecting the king. Gukesh is still hesitant. After this capture, the knight checks the king. He plays king, which is also the engine's move. Everything is precise at this moment. The engine is still keeping an eye on the bishop. It takes on h3, but that's no longer the move. One of the strongest moves. And here Magnus brought the bishop to introduce the theme at this moment. He plays again, changing his plan after the engine's best move is bishop to a6. Alright, as the position develops, he has ideas at the right moment. To play bishop to d3 and put pressure on the e4 pawn, that's exactly what's going to happen in this game. Gukesh can't just sit and watch. Magnus is bringing his pieces forward, and at this moment, Gukesh makes a logical move. Queen to a2 says, hold on, your roof is also made of glass. The pawn on a5 is weak. Magnus said, so you can take. Bishop d3, very precise, very precise. The whole center is falling. b3 is also falling. And at this moment, Gukesh played knight d2. He doesn't want, look, if he takes here, Magnus trades queens, then takes on b3, and then will take on e4 at the right moment. Gukesh said no, knight d2, solid. Queen 4 is stronger, solid. b3, and I'll take on a5. At this moment, Magnus plays h5. Raphael, what's the plan? Magnus is now always circling around taking the central pawn. So at the right moment, he wants to play h4 knight to g3, secure the e4 pawn, remove the knight and win the pawn in the center. That's what Gukesh wants. Well, Gukesh took it, and as soon as he did, there was no problem. Magnus traded queens, and now it goes into the endgame, where in this position, the engines give a decisive advantage. Magnus is winning here. If you put this in any engine, he plays h4 and everything falls apart. It's your move. The knight and bishop are falling. At this point, the position is lost from a positional perspective. But Gukesh will fight. He plays rook to h4. Raphael, remove the exclamation mark from that move. That's not correct. It's falling because Magnus can trade the rook and win a knight. Hold on. Let's respect each other here too. Magnus at this moment played rook from fb8 instantly, which again is the best move in this position. I can't believe it, Raphael. Why can't you take here and win Gukesh's knight? Because when I recapture, I threaten your knight. If your knight moves away, I get the piece back by capturing. The bishop, Magnus was already watching this and he saw it. Look at this bizarre and well-played game. This move was played saying, well, I'm defending the rook you threatened. The threat remains the same. And at this moment, Gukesh plays rook 2. Raphael, is this move inaccurate? This move has an inaccuracy. Now, look how crazy this is. Magnus here played king to g7, which is the engine's #1 move. And again, there are things we appreciate. There are things we understand, because it's really hard to explain this move. But Magnus could have captured. That's the engine's #2 move to take the knight and win a piece. Because the rook isn't right here, look. If you try the same idea of attacking the knight moves away and you lose the piece. It doesn't work because the knight comes to e2. While you capture here, you get forked. The rook on a2 isn't well placed, like it was in the other position where you couldn't capture. Now, Magnus, of course, he calculated this. That's a mathematical certainty. But he still played the engine's move, the #1 in this position, here in the game. But it's won here. Magnus is still winning. Gulk kept fighting. Rook to a7. Now he's starting to keep an eye over here. Magnus played rook to d4, so he wants to hold the bishop and capture the knight without those themes, right? Like when the pawn threatens the knight and the bishop falls. But now Gukesh plays knight to f3, attacking the rook and also threatening your pawn on h4. At this moment, Magnus went for the pawn. It can't fall, and he captured. Raphael, it's not right again. Why did Magnus capture now if the knight is falling? What did Gukesh play? Gukesh recaptured, and here you all must be screaming, I'm quitting chess, I'm done, I'm quitting chess, I'm not playing anymore. Why can't he capture the rook now, my goodness? Because the line is brilliant. Magnus recaptures, and now I attack your rook. And look, when you bring the rook back, you get captured on f2. I attack your rook again. I'm promoting. You'll have to give up the rook. So all of this is subtle. All of this is bizarre at the same time. And what's about to happen is going to be even more bizarre. Why? Gukesh recaptured and is still threatening the knight. The rook is also under threat. Magnus played nxh3. After the prediction of a fall, a fight ensues. Gukesh recaptured on h3, maintaining the threat on the rook. I'm keeping an eye on the bishop. How is Magnus going to solve all this? Magnus plays bishop takes e4, pinning the knight. And you can't take the rook, you can't take the piece, and it's gone. The whole center is going to fall. From move 5 up to this point, we were already shouting the best and most precise game of the year. Magnus played like a machine in an extremely complex game. Now Hugo plays king to h2. He escapes the pin, threatening the rook. Magnus moved the rook to d1, pinning the knight again. But if you move, you get checkmated. So it's not pinned because of the check, but it's pinned because of the mate threat. Guk reacted. g4, now he's going for it here. On the other side, it also gives the king a square. Magnus plays this brilliant move, so he wins another pawn. The whole position collapsed. Rook threatened after Guk exchanged. Knight to f4, things have gone off track. Everything is falling apart. It's b3 falling, it's a knight. It's a threatened rook. Guk went for counterplay. Look there, he prepared rook to c7. So he's threatening here. He's also threatening knight to g5, a brutal move. Now I'm coming in, doubling up the two rooks Magnus defended with the king, holding the knight on g5. This is the key moment. Time was running out. Magnus was still winning and everything was perfect. However, time started to get really tight, which would become relevant. Gukesh said, I'm going to bring the knight to g5, do whatever you want. And Magnus said, if you want to go to g5 and take on f7, so go ahead. He put the king in check position. How absurd. And the pawn on f7 is falling again. It's the machine's move. So it's a kind of chess that can't be understood with a human mind. It's really something alien. Gukesh played knight into 5, the king comes to the center of the board, and now you realize he can't take here on the right, he didn't take it. Gukesh played rook to 5, and he starts chasing Magnus's king in the middle. Raphael, why didn't he take here? By taking the rook to b3, you threaten mate, resulting in a lost position. White's position is lost. Guken played the machine's rook move, and Magnus responded with king to 4. Guken keeps chasing, possibly offering a draw by repetition, but Magnus declines. King to d3 is played. He crossed the board. Look at this bizarre maneuver. Bizarre, bizarre, bizarre. There's no other word for it. And at this moment, Guken wants to play rook to f2. And now he's trying to catch the king. The king could get checkmated here. He's very exposed. But it's still winning. And at this moment, Magnus plays f6, which was a move. And during the broadcast, the engine evaluation marked it as a mistake. And right after, the engine went deeper into the analysis and said, this move is normal, and the chat was shouting, it's a mistake move, and brilliant. That appears to be all. The engine recognized Magnus's position and affirmed its advantage. Neruga noted Guket's recent move of rook to f3. King to e2, Magnus threatens the rook and knight, material likely to be lost. But Guket played rook to 2. And now Magnus plays rook to d2. And after the exchange, the king moves away from the rook, the knight can get out, and Gukesh goes on to attack 2 pawns, and one of Magnus's pawns is going to fall. Magnus tried this move that hits the rook, but Gukesh simply defended the rook, keeping the threat on both pawns, and Magnus said, move the center, man, and I still win. Now pawn has fallen. So it's won, but it's positional. It's not about material anymore. Magnus played rook to f8. Guk responded with rook to f2. The king jumps to e1, and now the knight is played to d7. He touched the rook. The whole world was expecting the move rook to 8, of course, holding the pawn in the center, and then you move forward with that. But no, at this moment, something extraordinary happens. Magnus, here he plays knight, and 2, he gives the check, look there, leaving the rook hanging. And this move is incredible, but it's a serious mistake. One of the best games I've seen in Magnus's career up to this point, he makes a serious mistake. And he throws it all away, Raphael. The game has turned around. At that moment, Gukesh turned the game around, causing the bars to explode. It was unbelievable. Because now Gukesh plays the brilliant move, rook takes e2 gaining material. Magnus, of course, had calculated this. And I'll show what Magnus didn't see. The rook falls and Magnus plays queen to 4, making the position untenable. The pawn's coronation. Note the clock's time, as it was a crucial element. Magnus retreats and Gukesh retracts his knight. Magnus plays d3 and Gukesh responds with a strong move. The position is unsustainable and promotion is imminent. What's the next move? Magnus plays king e3, Raphael. Why doesn't he play d2? Gukesh saves with this move, promoting the pawn. Magnus didn't see that it ended with a fork in his calculation. The knight is the most treacherous piece in chess. Here you lose. You move out, I take. You take, I play h5. Oh, you can't hold it anymore. I'm going to promote way before. So Magnus missed the fork. Even in the complex Norwegian league, Magnus won't save the game despite his extraordinary play. That's why the games are so long. This move is to promote now without the fork. Gukesh maneuvers towards promotion, aiming to control the promotion square. Meanwhile, Magnus captures another pawn. And now Gukesh rushed h5, and let's see who runs faster. It's a race now, take. Magnus plays kd2, preparing to push the pawn. The knight is distant from the action. Gukesh played knight from b2 to e3, checking the king on d2. e2, the pawn is going to fall, and when you promote, I'll take the pawn with the knight, and I win. With the other pawn over there on h, look here. At this moment, Gukesh, Magnus resigned the game. Look at the images. All these final moments, something extraordinary, because Magnus, he realizes at the very last moment of the game, when he resigns, that there's no way to save it. The game was won. And he punches the table, which scares Gukesh in a way. It's something you don't see in chess. Something you don't see in chess. A punch on the table. That clip is going around the whole world. Magnus's reaction when he resigned was bizarre, and the tension of the match is still in the air. Of course, Gukesh played like a machine. According to the report's evaluation, of course, during the game, Magnus's pressure was very high. The whole game was perfect. Until the time trouble, where he made a serious mistake affecting his accuracy. Comment below your thoughts. It became a big buzz in the chess world. Results from Nori are pending. Magnus leads the tournament, tied with Caruana, followed by Gukesh and Naka. We continue following live at noon. Norwich S is unmissable. If you enjoyed, like the video. See you next time.